I'm moving on to Kate Tasker, who is the Industry Document Library Managing Archivist at UCSF. I will let Kate provide a little bit more information about herself before she does her presentation, but she will be giving us an overview of the collections as a whole and OIDA specifically. So if you have any questions at all, please populate them in the Q&A tab, and I'll be sure to read them out so we all can hear them, but also that Kate can answer them. So Kate, without further ado, take it away.
Thanks so much, Jason. And thank you, Dr. Welu and Dr. Tamori for providing the introduction today. That fantastic presentation on research in the documents and the long history of the Truth Tobacco Industry Documents Archive, and how this is really building us a foundation for maximizing the impact of documents coming out of opioid industry litigation and just the potential for research and other kinds of analysis that exist here. So good afternoon, good morning, depending on your time zone. My name is Kate Tasker. I am the managing archivist for the entire Industry Documents Library at UCSF. I'm also the co-lead for the Opioid Industry Documents Archive project, which we are working on here in collaboration with Johns Hopkins University, along with my counterpart and co-lead, Dr. Caleb Alexander at JHU. So following Dr. Welu's talk, I'm really here to provide an overview of the Industry Documents Library as a whole, its history, collections, and long public health impact, and give an introduction to how the Opioid Industry Documents Archive is building on this model to provide access to millions of previously internal documents from the opioid industry for research and public benefit. So many of you may have used the Industry Documents Library before, but for those who are new to the collections, the Industry Documents Library, or IDL, is a digital portal to millions of documents that were created by industries that influence public health. It's hosted by the University of California, San Francisco Library, and it's managed by a team of archivists and technologists. It began in the early 2000s as the Legacy Tobacco Documents Library, but it now includes more than 18 million documents related to the tobacco, opioid, chemical, drug, food, and fossil fuel industries. So as Dr. Welu was describing, the documents are a very extensive record of corporate activity, including marketing campaigns, public relations strategies, industry-funded research, and lobbying and regulatory influence. The bulk of the documents generally date from the 1970s through the 1990s, but we are continuing to add new documents very regularly. And with the Opioid Industry Documents Archives in particular, these documents date from the 1990s all the way through the present day. So what is in this archive? What's in IDL? The answer to that question is really the records that you would expect to find inside the file cabinets and hard drives of a large corporation or an executive saved files. They include internal memos, letters, emails, presentation slides, conference proceedings, marketing plans and reports and sales data, board minutes, unpublished scientific studies, advertisements, including video and audio recordings, as well as legal transcripts and depositions and many other materials. On this slide, there's a stock image, which is just here to illustrate the vast scale of the collection when we're talking about millions and millions of documents. But I should clarify that the IDL does not actually house any physical documents. All of the collections are digital and available online. So the documents come from a wide variety of sources, including whistleblowers, litigation, public records requests, legal and journalist sources, and other libraries and archives who we partner with to digitize paper collections and add them for cross-searching across the collections. Logos of some of the companies that are represented in the documents are shown here. If you're interested in learning more about how we collect documents, or if you're aware of documents which could be added to the library, please check out the website, look on our About page, or you can contact me with questions. We're always interested in learning more about other sources of material, making sure we have a complete set as possible. So kind of winding back to the very beginning of the tobacco documents in particular, to set the scene for how these collections have been established, the growth, the impact, and where they're heading. So the first documents at the library came in a box, which was sent by an anonymous whistleblower at the Brown and Williamson Tobacco Company back in May of 1994. The whistleblower used the code name Mr. Butts as the return address. This was after the famous cartoon character in the Doonesbury comic strip. Mr. Butts sent this box of paper documents to UCSF professor Dr. Stanton Glantz. And Dr. Glantz, as many of you will know, is an internationally recognized expert and leader in tobacco control. He was the founding director of the UCSF Center for Tobacco Control Research and Education, and he played an instrumental role in establishing the documents library at UCSF. So Dr. Glantz looked at the 4,000 pages of documents in this box, and he saw that they provided an unprecedented opportunity to learn about the inner workings of the tobacco industry. The documents dated from the early 1950s to the early 1980s, and they consisted primarily of confidential internal memos and scientific studies on the addictive nature of nicotine and other health effects of tobacco smoke. So they clearly showed that the company Brown and Williamson was aware of the dangers of smoking, but that the company had continued to deny those dangers to the public. Many of the documents contained internal discussion of the tobacco industry's public relations and legal strategies, and they were often labeled confidential or privileged. Copies of these documents had actually also been sent to other public health experts and to journalists, but organizations were understandably quite reluctant to make them public because of the risk of being sued by the industry. Dr. Glantz worked with UCSF to ultimately deposit these documents at the UCSF library, where they could be kept safe, cataloged, and made available for other researchers to use. A year later, in 1995, Brown and Williamson did sue the university to try to remove the documents from the library. But by this point, copies of the documents were circulating in other places, and the university was able to argue that they were in the public domain, and so should be organized and made available to scholars and other parties. A California Superior Court judge ruled that removing the documents from the university would impact the public study of the material, and that there was, quote, a very strong public interest, end quote, in making the documents available. Brown and Williamson lost the appeal, and the library was able to make the documents public in the reading room. And then, since this was 1995, researchers could also get a copy on a CD-ROM. Meanwhile, litigation against the tobacco industry was continuing. By the early 1990s, several states had sued the largest cigarette manufacturers to recover healthcare costs incurred by Medicaid and other government health programs to treat smoking-related illnesses. And in 1997, 4 states, including Minnesota, reached settlement agreements to resolve these lawsuits. And thanks to Minnesota Attorney General Hubert Humphrey III, the Minnesota settlement included a groundbreaking requirement that the companies must make the documents disclosed during litigation available to the public. This was highly unusual, as in almost all cases, documents produced in discovery are sealed or they're destroyed after the conclusion of the case. But Attorney General Humphrey argued that the most important thing to come out of the litigation should be the truth. And this has been an incredible precedent for document disclosure in other cases. And this is really kind of the reason why we're seeing documents being disclosed from opioid litigation, looking all the way back to this, this groundbreaking decision by the Minnesota Attorney General. In 1998, the Master Settlement Agreement resolved all of the remaining lawsuits by 46 states, the District of Columbia, and 5 US territories. And it also included the requirement for documents to be made public for 10 years, which was one of the components of the settlement. And the MSA remains the largest civil litigation settlement in US history. So as the majority of these documents were pre-digital, going back to the 1950s, all of the documents had to be stored somewhere. And the tobacco companies were ordered to create document depositories where the public could go to review the material. So although the UCSF Industry Documents Library doesn't have an enormous warehouse full of paper documents, an enormous warehouse did exist, which housed thousands and thousands of boxes of documents. One depository was created in Minnesota, which contained over 27,000 boxes. And a second depository was located in Guildford, near London, which housed another 6 to 7 million pages of documents related to the British American Tobacco Company. The Minnesota settlement also required continuing public disclosure of tobacco company documents, which were produced in any subsequent litigation relating to smoking and health in the US for 10 years. So in accordance with the terms of that settlement, documents produced that were not subject to protective orders or privilege claims had to be placed in the Minnesota depository within 30 days. They also had to be digitized and made available online through the tobacco companies' websites, which the companies were required to fund. So all of those documents housed in the depository were ultimately digitized and saved on computer tapes. And then the National Association of Attorneys General provided a copy of those tapes to the UCSF library so that they could be put online and made available freely to the public. The tapes initially contained more than 20 million pages of previously secret tobacco company documents, which formed the core of what was then called the Legacy Tobacco Documents Library, officially launched online in January of 2002. Every month since then, the library has downloaded millions of documents from the company's websites, and the collection has now grown to over 92 million pages. The Legacy Tobacco Documents Library was created with funding provided by the American Legacy Foundation, which is now known as the Truth Initiative, and the tobacco collections are now known as the Truth Tobacco Industry Documents Library. And of course, we acknowledge and thank the Truth Initiative for their long support to the library. Briefly, a little bit more about the British American tobacco documents, which were required to be disclosed by the Minnesota litigation, but they were not all placed in the Minnesota depository. So the vast majority of those documents were in the Guildford depository in the UK, and they were not posted online. So researchers either had to travel to the depository to search the collection, where they were subject to quite difficult conditions of access imposed by the company. Copy machines were not available, so copies had to be ordered, and they could take up to a year to be delivered. And researchers fought for years to try to get better access, ultimately spearheading a coalition of UCSF, the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and the Mayo Clinic, with funding support from the Wellcome Trust, the American Heart Foundation, and the Flight Attendant Medical Research Institute. They formed the Guildford Archiving Project, which worked to order copies of all of the documents in the Guildford depository and to digitize them, a process which took more than 4 years. Those documents have now all been added to the library, and they continue to be freely and publicly available. In 1999, the US Department of Justice brought another civil lawsuit against the major tobacco companies, alleging that they had violated the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO, and that they had conspired to mislead the public about the health hazards of smoking. In 2006, U.S. District Judge Gladys Kessler found the tobacco companies liable, and she ordered them to continue making public any documents produced in litigation related to smoking and health for another 15 years. So this effectively extended the document disclosure provision from the Master Settlement Agreement, and the order in this RICO case lasted until September of 2021. So the Minnesota and Guildford depositories have now both closed to the public, so there are no more warehouses full of paper documents. But thanks to significant efforts of hundreds of people across different institutions, including UCSF, the Guildford Archiving Project, other partner organizations and funding organizations, the documents are all remaining available online. So with that history and background and context of where the tobacco documents came from, I'm going to briefly talk about the impact that they've had. The tobacco documents have been publicly available for research now for more than 20 years. And in that time, researchers and others have authored more than 1,000 publications citing the documents, including over 800 peer-reviewed books and articles, such as the major works here, and including Dr. Wei-Lu's book, Pushing Cool, which he was describing just in the keynote earlier. And researchers continue to be very heavily active in the archive, with academic papers published frequently across a wide range of topics and disciplines. And increasingly, as you'll hear later, authors are analyzing how other industries have adopted the same tactics as the tobacco industry. And these studies are contributing to a rapidly growing issue referred to as the commercial determinants of health. In addition to academic research, the documents have also been featured in investigative journalism and film, including the Chicago Tribune's award-winning series Playing with Fire, which investigated toxic flame retardants and the campaigns that the tobacco and chemical industries led to promote the use of those chemicals. Another example is the 2014 film Merchants of Doubt, which we highly recommend for those interested in getting an overview of documents, disclosure, and industry documents in general. And the film was directed by Robert Kenner, based on the 2010 book by Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway, and it investigates how a group of high-level scientists with extensive political and industry connections ran effective campaigns to mislead the public and deny well-established scientific knowledge about smoking, global warming, and other harms. So all of this research and investigation based on the tobacco documents has had a significant impact on public health policy. As just one example, California's tobacco control program, which has been informed by documents research conducted at UCSF and at other institutions, is credited with saving the state over $500 billion in medical costs between 1989 and 2018. And work with the tobacco documents has also made a national impact, with President Clinton stating that the tobacco documents analysis published in a 1995 special issue of the Journal of the American Medical Association informed his decision to move forward with a proposal to regulate nicotine, cigarettes, and smokeless tobacco. And then the 2009 Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act, signed by President Obama, ultimately gave the FDA the power to regulate the tobacco industry. And finally, at the international level, a report by experts on the tobacco industry documents was instrumental in developing the World Health Organization's Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, the first global health treaty. Article 5.3 of the treaty is aimed at protecting public health policy from the influence of the tobacco industry. So this is all really to demonstrate that public access to such an unprecedented amount of previously internal tobacco industry documents has provided significant opportunities for all kinds of research, including further litigation in tobacco control policy, business ethics, history, and even areas such as product design and marketing, linguistics, and other domains. So as this research was unfolding, the library began to recognize the increasing research and public health interest into how other industries have adopted similar strategies to the tobacco industry, and so has begun collecting documents from the drug, the chemical, food, and fossil fuel industries. There have been fewer successful lawsuits resulting in document disclosure from these other industries, so these collections are still relatively small compared to the 15 million documents in the tobacco archive. But these collections still contain hundreds of thousands of pages. So across all of the collections in the Industry Documents Library, and this is including the documents in the Opioid Industry Documents Archive, we have over 106 million pages in over 18 million documents. So there is certainly a lot of data to explore. The UCSF Library also houses the Tobacco Control Archive, which preserves records of advocacy groups, government agencies, university research, and other materials related to tobacco control. So all of this work is really helping us to think about the opioid industry documents, maximizing the benefit of access to these materials, and thinking about the context both across the industry documents, the opioid industry documents themselves, but then within the larger collections of other industry materials, really kind of supporting these connections, analyses, networks, following the trail of public relations firms and other individuals connected across different industries. So turning now to the Opioid Industry Documents Archive itself. So in 2019, the team here at the Industry Documents Library began searching for documents that were becoming publicly available that related to the opioid industry. And in 2021, after several discussions of our common goals and interests, UCSF and Johns Hopkins University began our formal collaboration to build the Opioid Industry Documents Archive together to house the millions of documents that were starting to become available and are now being fully disclosed from opioid litigation. So the Opioid Industry Documents Archive, or the OIDA, is envisioned as a state-of-the-art digital archive of industry documents, advancing understanding of root causes of the opioid epidemic and preventing future harms. And UCSF and Johns Hopkins are both pursuing excellence in library science and information technology, digital archiving, as well as scholarship focused on many dimensions of the opioid epidemic, ranging from the history of medicine to pharmaceutical policy to clinical care. And as you can imagine, this is an enormous undertaking involving teams of librarians, technologists, scientists, historians, and other experts at both UCSF and Johns Hopkins, as well as staff from state attorney general offices, plaintiffs' counsel, and a national advisory committee, which includes people with lived experience of the epidemic. So I'd like to thank all of those who work with us and support the archive, including our speakers, our archive staff, many of whom are here today, for their dedicated efforts to preserve these materials and make them available for the public's benefit. So to date, we have made over 3 million documents public, and we're processing millions more. Collections include internal industry documents publicly disclosed through major settlements with companies including Insys Therapeutics, Mallinckrodt, which was the largest generic manufacturer of opioids, and McKinsey & Company, which provided a lot of consulting services to Purdue Pharma, Mallinckrodt, and other companies. We also have included public materials from other state and city cases against opioid manufacturers and pharmacies, files obtained by journalists through court orders and Freedom of Information Act requests, and other publicly available documents from sources such as the multi-district litigation. And these documents are all being added to the Opioid Industry Documents Archive and are accessible through the Industry Documents Library website. So all of these opioid documents can be cross-searched with the IDL's other collections. And as with the tobacco industry documents, the opioid industry collections can inform studies of corporate knowledge, decisions, and actions relating to topics such as marketing, promotion, front groups, lobbying, and other activities. And just like the tobacco industry documents, there's enormous potential for far-reaching implications on academic research, journalism, law, health policy, legislation, and the protection and improvement of public health. And our next speakers will discuss their research experience and aims using the opioid industry documents to pursue questions on topics such as these. And the archive team is also undertaking significant work to enhance the user interface, the search tools, and to provide data sets to support research across lots of different disciplines, including those who are looking at computational analysis, digital humanities, and other forms of data science application. So academic research is already underway with several publications just in the past 2 years focused on the opioid documents by researchers who are here, and many of you might also be conducting your own work and doing research in the archive. Please do let us know if you're doing this work so that we can make sure to keep track. We add all documents and publications that cite the documents to our overall bibliography. So we'd love to know about your work so that we can make sure that that's represented. The documents from the Opioid Industry Documents Archive have also been featured in some major investigative reporting by outlets such as the Washington Post and New York Times. And this is contributing to the ongoing national debate about how to hold the industry accountable and address the devastating opioid crisis in the US. The workshop later on is going to provide much more detail on how to get started searching in the Opioid Industry Documents Archive. So for now, I'm just going to point out a couple of key tools you can access. So this is just a shot of the homepage for the opioid industry documents in particular. You can see that it's situated within the industry documents library, and there is a menu across the top where you can select a particular industry archive or choose to search across all of the documents at once. And at the top right, you'll also find a menu of options where you can access news and updates about the documents. This is also where you can choose to subscribe to our newsletter if that's of interest. You'll also find a link to the bibliography, which lists all the publications that we're aware of, which cite the documents. And we have a set of research tools and resources to help guide you through the collections as well. And of course, you can also find contact information for the archive staff on the help page if you have additional questions. So with that, I will just say thank you so much for your interest in the Opioid Industry Documents Archive and the IDL in general. And we really encourage you to learn more and to stay in touch with us at the project through our newsletter, through social media, or by contacting our team to receive updates about new collections, webinars, research, and other opportunities to get involved. So I could take a few questions now, but also please feel free to contact me or other members of the team if we can answer further questions. And this will also be covered in the workshop portion later on as well. Thank you.
Oh, Kate, could you stop sharing your screen real fast? Yeah, sorry. Thank you so much, Kate. That was great. Great introduction. Yeah, for those of us in the workshop, we'll go over a little bit in more depth in terms of the searching and some of the tools available. But if anyone, has any questions who is not going to attend the workshop, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be as helpful as possible. One question, Kate, that came in, Adam looks like may have answered some of this from Julia Comiskey again. And her question was the scope of the archive. What are some of the non-US activities or documents that might be found in the collection? Adam was saying that those documents are limited, at least in the opioid industry records, but I wonder if you could speak really quickly about, if there is non-US material writ large that you may be aware of in the IDL as a whole.
Thank you, Jason, and thanks, Adam, and thank you for the question. So yes, because the documents are primarily obtained as a result of document disclosure from US-based lawsuits, the documents primarily are from the United States. There might be exceptions where a company is multinational, so British American tobacco records are in the Documents Archive, in the Tobacco Documents Archive, and there are other aspects of international business that might be captured, and then those documents have been produced as part of the litigation. So you'll find documents in the tobacco collections, for example, from Japan, from Holland. There are documents in other languages, but it is a much smaller proportion of the archive. We are collecting documents now from the opioid industry. Primarily, those documents, again, are coming from US lawsuits, and so they are more focused on the US. There's also considerations to be made about the legal ability that we have to collect documents from outside of the United States. So it's not a major focus of our collecting. We're looking at these documents that are coming out of the litigation, but we're always interested to hear from researchers about what you all need to do your work and your research, and if there are aspects of international business that would be of interest or help, please do get in touch with us and let us know what those areas would be.
Great, thanks, Kate, so much. Since we're sort of pressed for time, I'd like to move on to the next two quick presentations about folks who are currently undergoing research in the collection and want them to give their insight and feedback on what they're finding and what they're researching. So I want to start with, we'll first start with Adam Kuhn, and again, for the sake of time, I'll let you all introduce yourselves, where you are, what kinds of research you do, and what in the collection you're specifically